Ambassador Comachon is from Barbados, as was mentioned in the introduction. So it's very early in Barbados right now. I think he was joining us from 7 a.m. And so we're so grateful that you are up early with us uh, for this event. So Ambassador, we're going to give you the floor, and we would love your reflections even on what you heard, and please, by all means, dive into your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nikita. And greetings to all of my brothers and sisters. I'm hearing my voice. Thanks to the CARICOM nationals in Ethiopia, and in particular to Sister Janelle and to the Global Black Center for inviting me to make this presentation. I think that Brother Chama posed a very important question. He wanted to know, how is it that this population of enslaved persons brought across the Atlantic to strange lands where they were treated as enslaved people, how did they manage to rise up, to gain their own nations, to secure independence and national determination for themselves? And Brother Chama, in answering that question, I would say that the Caribbean people, and I can speak specifically of the Caribbean aspect of the African diaspora. The Caribbean people are people of great capacity. When our ancestors were brought across that Middle Passage, they came with themselves. They came with their African personality, their African spirituality, their African sense of themselves, their African culture. And then they were inserted into this very barbaric, brutal slave society. They were also inserted into perhaps the most advanced type of economic production back in the 17th century, the sugar plantation system. The first factories of Europe's Industrial Revolution were constructed in those Caribbean colonies, in places like Barbados and Jamaica, Antigua, St. Kitts. That was a sugar factory, the fields of cane to grow the sugar cane, the windmills to crush the sugar cane stalks to produce cane juice, and then the boiling house or sugar factory to put that cane juice through various chemical and heating processes to produce sugar, rum, molasses. And that entire proto-industrial enterprise was run by our ancestors. They call them slaves, but they were carpenters, blacksmiths, coopers, sugar boilers, and many of them brought their skills from Africa with them. So our people in the Caribbean had the experience of operating a semi-industrial type of production for centuries. So all of that, plus the fact that they had to resist the oppression, they had to try to preserve their intrinsic humanity, all of that produced a people of great capacity, a people who were able to humanize those barbaric slave societies and to produce the civilized, humane, nurturing societies that exist in the Caribbean today. And Sister Janelle, I would say you must be mindful that yes, when our ancestors were brought across that Middle Passage and subjected to those slave plantation societies, yes, they lost much of their original African culture, but be conscious as well that they insisted in preserving the essence of that African spirituality, of that African personality, the essence of that African culture within themselves. And they also went on to express in the new environment tremendous cultural creativity. In fact, I would say that the Black people of the African diaspora have perhaps been the most culturally and artistically creative people in the history of humanity. Just look at what our people have created, whether in the fields of music, art, dance, literature, poetry, nation languages, folklore, scientific invention. You can go on and on. So we need to bear that in mind, that while the African diaspora populations of the New World, of the Caribbean, Latin America, North America, while we may not practice the identical culture of continental Africans, we have brought something new, something very creative. We have made a tremendous contribution to global African civilization. And we need to think of global African civilization and the unique contributions that we all make to that overarching global African civilization. And one of the great gifts that the African people of the diaspora have given to global African civilization is the notion, the concept, the practice of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism was largely a creation of the African diaspora. Pan-Africanism was born out of the severe oppression and anti-Black racism that was visited upon the scattered sons and daughters of Africa during those centuries of European imposed enslavement and colonization. And it became clear to our people, especially in the diaspora, that all African or African descended people, whether we lived on the continent or in the diaspora, that we faced a common predicament and therefore had a common interest in uniting with each other in an effort to emancipate ourselves, to rebuild our African civilization, and basically to make an effort to establish Black power and self-determination. So Pan-Africanism is both a philosophy and an organized people's movement. Put simply, it is a political and cultural phenomenon in which the continent of Africa, Africans and African descendants are regarded as one unit. It seeks to regenerate and unify Africa and to promote a feeling of oneness among the people of the African world. Nowadays we talk about global Africa. It valorizes the African past, inculcates pride in African values, and basically seeks to organize African people worldwide to be effective and powerful in this world. And for me, Pan-Africanism has a very personal value. For me, it provides me with a nexus of a matrix, if you will, of history, of philosophy, of heroes, of milestones, of a sense of purpose and a sense of mission, a sense of community, a sense of family. It provides it provides me, and I would say it provides all of us with that nexus within which we can locate ourselves and root ourselves. And the creativity of Pan-Africanism has given to us such concepts as repatriation, Ethiopianism, African or Black nationalism, African personality, Garveyism, negritude, African concepts of African liberation, African Renaissance, concepts of Black power. And of course, it has given to us a pantheon of heroes ranging from Edward Wilmot Blyden to Henry Sylvester Williams to Emperor Menelik, Emperor Haile Selassie, Empress Menem, W.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Amy Ashwood Garvey, Amy Jakes Garvey, Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, George Padmore, C.L.R. James, Stokely Carmichael, Ras McConnell, Julius Nyerere, Winnie Mandela, Miriam Makeba, Bob Marley, Fela Ransom Kuti, and we can go on and on. But for me, personally, two of the greatest heroes of Pan-Africanism are two heroes that originated in my homeland of Barbados. And I refer to Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford and Emma Mama. I think that's how they refer to Mama in Ethiopia, Mignon Innes Ford. And this is the book I wrote about Arnold and Mignon Ford. It's called The Pan-African Love Story of Arnold and Mignon Ford. And for me, they are exemplars of Pan-Africanism. And they have laid, in their life work, they have laid a foundation for the beautiful and powerful reparations movement we see being constructed all across global Africa today. And for those of you who may not know the stories of this Barbadian husband and wife duo, just let me explain briefly. Arnold Ford was born in Barbados just 4 decades in the 19th century, 4 decades after the abolition of slavery. By some miracle, his parents were able to secure for him training in music. He was trained as a violinist, a bassist, and he also played the harp. As a young man, he entered the British Navy, where he served as a master musician in the British Navy. And then, having imbibed some of that military culture, he found his way to Harlem at the birth of the Harlem Renaissance. And he played a very important role in the Harlem Renaissance. He was one of the pioneers of the establishment of Black classical African-American concert music, one of the pioneers of jazz. He also in Harlem discovered Marcus Garvey. He was virtually a founding member in New York of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And he became a very, very important member of the UNIA. In fact, he was second only to Marcus Garvey as the public face of the UNIA. He was the musical director of the UNIA. He composed most of the music of the UNIA. He was responsible for the impressive artistic and cultural spectacles of the UNIA, but he was also a theologian. He was a rabbi. He was a pioneer in the Black Jewish faith. And because he had had that experience in the British Navy, it was he who organized the paramilitary units of the UNIA. So this was an extremely accomplished man, musician, theologian, philosopher, historian, a scholar of mysticism, and yes, then Mignon, she followed him to New York and became his student, became a member of the UNIA. And to cut a long story short, when the UNIA faltered in the late 1920s, Arnold, by then the leader of a Black Jewish congregation, accepted the offer of the Ethiopians to lead a repatriation effort to Ethiopia. He he led that effort in the year 1930. In fact, he attempted to be in Ethiopia for the coronation of Haile Selassie. He missed it by a few days, but he immediately he landed in Ethiopia. He created a gift for the new emperor. He wrote an anthem for the new emperor. That anthem is known as the Universal Ethiopian Anthem. He had actually composed that anthem for the UNIA in 1918. But when he got, and so that anthem was the anthem of the UNIA. But when he got to Ethiopia, he kept the melody, but he wrote new words in tribute to the new emperor. And that anthem today, not only is it the anthem of the UNIA, but the version that he wrote for the emperor is the anthem of the Rastafari movement. It's the anthem of the Ethiopian World Federation. In 1930, he established a resettlement agricultural repatriation scheme at Lake Tana in Ethiopia. He brought over 100 repatriates with him. He and Mignon got married in Ethiopia, produced two boy children. And when Mussolini was massing his armies on the border of Ethiopia, about to invade, and Caribbean and African American migrants were fleeing Ethiopia in fear, he made Arnold, by then he was fatally ill, he was on his deathbed, but he made his young wife pledge that come what may, she would never leave or abandon Ethiopia. And she gave him that promise on his deathbed. He died and Mussolini invaded. And that young wife with two young children became a member of the Ethiopian resistance, resisting the Italian invasion. Several occasions, she was beaten, she was imprisoned by the Italians, but she held firm and she survived the occupation. And then when the emperor came back, the emperor restored Ethiopia's independence, he set out a call, we have to rebuild Ethiopia. And she answered that call in the field of education. She established a small school that went on to become a very powerful school, the Princess Zenebi Walk School. She introduced the modern educational curriculum to Ethiopia, education for girls, the first co-educational establishment. And she did a tremendous job in uplifting girls and women in Ethiopia. And so that is just a snapshot of her. Of course, when the emperor was overthrown, the Derg went after Mignon and her school because they were so closely associated with the emperor and the royal family. But just to give you, I'll just give you one small quotation from Mignon to give you a sense of who this woman was. After the overthrow of the emperor, during the 17-year rule of the Derg, when Ethiopia descended into all kinds of infighting and terror and much destruction and mayhem, Mignon lamented, and I'm just going to quote her, and this is what she said. She says, "They are all my children, and I suffer when I see those children that I carried in my arms destroy each other for reasons that are at best ephemeral and at worst lacking in the substance beneficial to our mutual growth and development, and ultimately to our common heritage and brotherhood. It gives you a sense of the Pan-African instincts, the Pan-African vision and mission of this great lady. And so those two little boys who were infants when Mussolini invaded, they grew up they became professors at Howard University. Professor Joseph and Professor Abby Ford, and they all were laid to rest in Addis Ababa. They're all buried at the Addis Ababa cemetery. And so Mignon and Arnold Ford are two great contributions that the diaspora has made to the advancement of global Africa. And I want to make the point that their life stories encapsulate the essential message and the essential components of the reparations movement. And to prove this, I will begin by giving a little legal definition of reparations, because the concept of reparations is actually rooted in international law. Yes, it is rooted in morality and ethics as well, but fundamentally, it is an international law remedy that we are demanding. So the definition, the legal basis for reparations is set out in a well-known international law case, the factory at Chorzów, in which the Permanent Court of International Justice, this is the court that preceded today's ICJ, International Court of Justice, it stated, quote, "It is a principle of international law that the breach of an engagement involves an obligation to make reparation in an adequate form. Reparation must, as far as possible, wipe out all the consequences of the illegal act and re-establish the situation which would, in all probability, have existed if that act had not been committed." So that is the essence of reparations, to re-establish the situation that would have existed if that crime had not been committed in the first place. And so I want to thank Sister Nikita for giving that explanation of the CARICOM 10-point reparations plan or demand. And Nikita, I think the CARICOM Reparations Commission should make you a global ambassador to advocate and to explain that CARICOM 10-point plan. But in addition to those 10 points, we have come to recognize that perhaps one of the first planks of reparations is decolonization, independence, and nationhood. The same decolonization, independence, and nationhood that our Brother Chama referred to. Because before our ancestors were taken across that Middle Passage, they lived on the African continent in their own nations. They had nationhood. They had national sovereignty and self-determination. And therefore, you cannot tell me that you take our ancestors out of that situation on the African continent of possessing their own nations, take them to slave colonies, work them as slaves for hundreds of years, and then in this 21st century, they are expected to continue to exist as subjects in European colonies ruled by European countries. That is unacceptable. And so the very first reparative justice demand of our people has to be for decolonization, independence, and nationhood. We must all have our own nations. And then, of course, the CARICOM 10-point plan, the repair, Walter Rodney wrote the book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, how Europe purchased its development at the expense of the systematic underdevelopment of Africa. It's all laid out there. So Hilary Beckles wrote the book, How Britain Underdeveloped the Caribbean, how Britain purchased its development at the expense of the systematic looting and plundering of the African people of the diaspora. And so the 10-point plan is basically addressing the historical legacies of underdevelopment. And I thank Sister Nikita for focusing on the third plank of that 10-point plan, which is repatriation. And this is a very important part of the reparations demand. In fact, Sister Janelle referred to it as perhaps the primary demand. And I agree with that, and I will get to that just a little later. But in addition to addressing those historical legacies of underdevelopment, reparations also envisages us repairing, restructuring, revamping the international economic and political order and its major institutions and processes, because that currently existing international economic and political order has its roots in and came out of those centuries of enslavement and colonization, and our African and Caribbean and Latin American, our Black and Brown nations have been inserted into that order, still in a structurally subservient and exploitative manner. And so part of the reparations campaign is to engineer a fundamental revamping and restructuring of that unjust order. And then there's the self-repair and self-healing that several of the speakers mentioned today. And this we must do for ourselves. This is not about making claims, directing claims at European governments or institutions. We must do the self-repair and self-healing ourselves. Of course, they will be required to provide relevant finances to finance some of the programs. But this is something we must do for ourselves. We need to look within ourselves, look within our national cultures, where we see any vestiges of notions of white supremacy and Black inferiority. We must identify them and remove them and heal as a people. And allied to this, we have come to recognize more and more that we have to engage in a systematic deconstruction of the myth of white European superiority, of European civilization as the pinnacle, the universal, the highest universal value that we must all aspire to. More and more, we have come to recognize that that much vaunted European civilization is actually built on criminality, on crimes, on slavery, on genocide, on systematic crimes against humanity, on looting and plundering. So the emperor is naked, and we must point out the nakedness of the emperor to ourselves, first of all, but also to the emperor and to the world. So we must deconstruct that matrix of white supremacy and superiority that they have constructed for themselves. So basically, that is reparations. And if you examine the life stories of Arnold and Mignon Ford, you will see that in their lives, they were prefiguring all of these aspects of the reparations movement. Many people are not even aware that even the Black liberation colors, the red, black, and green, were the invention of Rabbi Arnold Josiah Ford. Go back to his song Ethiopia, composed in 1918, and the lyrics of that song, advance to victory, to be led by the red, black, and green, with the red, black, and green flowing before us. He created that notion of the red, black, and green being the colors of our global African flag, and the meaning of those colors. So there's so much of our current Pan-African and reparations movement that is rooted in the work of these two very, very remarkable Pan-Africanists. So where are we now? Well, we are in the process of constructing a global reparations movement. CARICOM, the CARICOM development, which goes back to 2013, when our heads of government came together and decided to launch a CARICOM reparations movement. So they set up these national committees. Each CARICOM country has a national government appointed committee on reparations. And then above them, they set up the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which is the overarching regional body that is chaired by Sir Hilary Beckles, our great historian and the Vice Chancellor of our University of the West Indies. And I would like to say to one of the audience members that yes, we do have institutions of our own. We have many institutions of our own. So please don't believe that our institutions are simply some appendage attached to some European or North American institutions. We have built our own independent institutions, including our University of the West Indies, which has physical campuses in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Antigua, and also has a virtual college. So that CARICOM initiative proved to be very important. It helped to revive interest in the reparations movement. It helped to revive something that Africa had started in a very serious way back in the early 1990s. And we must never forget that people like Chief Moshood Abiola of Nigeria, in collaboration with Jamaica's Ambassador Dudley Thompson, they started on the African continent that a reparations initiative in 1992. That was then fed into the OAU, the then Organization of African Unity, the Abuja Conference, the Abuja Proclamation. The OAU established its group of eminent persons on reparations. And so the OAU did very important work in the 1990s that inspired us in the Caribbean. However, when the OAU became defunct and transitioned into the new African Union around the year 2000, the new African Union neglected to replicate those reparation bodies in the new institution. And so it was really left to the Caribbean then to pick up the baton in 2013. But that CARICOM initiative has energized the reparations movement in North America, for example. So you have in the United States, the African American National Reparations Commission. You have in Latin America, in Brazil, in Colombia, you have important governmental reparations initiatives that have been developed. And to the credit of CARICOM, when CARICOM set up the CARICOM Reparations Commission, the heads of government gave that commission the authority to admit into associate membership reparations organizations from the Greater Caribbean, from countries that are not member states of CARICOM. And so we have been able to integrate from the US Virgin Islands, from the Dutch colonies of the Caribbean. They've come on board as associate members of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. And I know that the community there, the Caribbean community there in Ethiopia, that you have recently applied for associate membership, I can tell you that our African brothers and sisters in Central America, they too are on the verge of applying for associate membership. So we in the Caribbean, we recognize that our reparations campaign can't just be a Caribbean campaign. It really has to be a global African campaign. And we recognize as well that we're inspired by the anti-apartheid movement that brought down apartheid in South Africa. We had to construct a global anti-apartheid movement to develop the strength to bring down apartheid. And that global movement included allies, European allies, people of good conscience in European countries, whether it is people out of the churches, the student movement, the trade unions, the peace movement. And that lesson has not been lost on us. We have to construct a powerful global movement. And we recognize that central to that global movement has to be the continent of Africa. Africa, after all, the continent is the center of global Africa, that tremendous continent of 12 million square miles, 1.4 billion people, 55 different nation states. And so we are now in the process, CARICOM and the African Union, we are now in the process of developing an AU CARICOM partnership on reparations. And many of you would be aware of the conference that we held in Addis on the 7th of September of this year. That conference produced a joint AU CARICOM declaration on reparations. And just about maybe a week ago, we finally received the official Addis Ababa, the official text of the Addis Ababa Declaration on Transcontinental Partnership in Pursuit of Reparatory Justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. That's the joint declaration that we agreed upon at that conference in Addis. And if we go to paragraph 34 of that joint declaration, this is what we say. We will strive to expand this transcontinental partnership framework, embracing Africa and CARICOM, to also include the African diaspora in Latin America, North America, and Europe, and elsewhere in the world, to build a strong common front among them in pursuit of reparations and reparatory justice at the global level. So that is the overarching vision, and that is the mission that we have embarked upon. And to the credit of the African Union lost no time in, just like we in CARICOM, we have our CARICOM Reparations Commission, we have our CARICOM 10-point plan, and incidentally, that 10-point plan is now being developed into a full-fledged manifesto. It is, the work basically has been done, but we are waiting for sign-off from above our CARICOM Reparations Commission. We have a prime ministerial subcommittee on reparations, 6 prime ministers who have oversight of the entire project, chaired by Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley of Barbados. So we are moving in the direction, we are going beyond just the initial 10 points. It's a full-fledged manifesto. And yes, and so we are well on our way. Africa, the African Union, to its credit, they have wasted no time in establishing their own African Union Committee on Reparations, and to their credit, they have reached out beyond the AU and beyond the African continent, and they have made Ambassador June Suma of St. Lucia, and incidentally, a member of the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. They have made her a member of that AU committee, and likewise, they have established a committee of legal experts on reparations, and they reached out to me and have made me a member of that committee. So the African Union is not just talking the talk, it is walking it as well by trying to manifest that global African vision. And so we are on our way. We are on our way. I think we are now at a stage where I heard Brother Chama making the point that we have done a lot of studies, and yes, we have all kinds of studies. We have calculations. I mean, we have things like the Brattle Report, the Report on Reparations for Transatlantic Chattel Slavery in the Americas and the Caribbean, which has actually come up, which was actually calculated in monetary terms, what is owed by the various European powers to various Caribbean countries. So a lot of that work has been done, but I think we are at the stage now we are ready to up the ante. We are at the stage now where we are ready to deploy international legal strategies, either at the International Court of Justice. We are ready to deploy at several of the treaty supervising bodies of the UN system, the supervising body for the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Human Rights Council. There are several possibilities for bringing legal challenges in favor of reparations. And then we need to use our collective power in multilateral organizations. Between CARICOM and the AU, we control 69 seats and 69 votes in the United Nations General Assembly. And I think we are well poised to begin to utilize, to bring resolutions in favor of reparations at the UN General Assembly, in the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit, in the Summit of the Francophonie International Organization, just to give 3 examples. So we're on our way, and the final thing I want to say before I conclude, I want to speak specifically about the CARICOM and Ethiopia, and CARICOM and the AU, because when I was there in Addis in September, I had very fruitful meetings with the Caribbean community there in Addis. I got some good insights into the situation of the community. And I have, I have crafted my own ideas, my own proposals as to how we could build a structure that would be helpful to all of us. And at the heart of that structure must be a decision that was made by the AU and CARICOM at the summit in September. They decided, and that decision is captured in the communique that came out of the summit, that CARICOM should establish a CARICOM office in Addis at the headquarters of the African Union. And likewise, the AU should establish an AU office in Guyana at the Secretariat of CARICOM. And I am going to be pushing really hard for that to be operationalized as soon as possible. Because if we have those two offices, we already have a memorandum of understanding between CARICOM and the AU. And if we have those two offices in place, those offices will be able to really push the operationalization of the memorandum of understanding and to get us involved in all kinds of processes and activities. However, if we establish such an office, that office need not only be relevant to the AU. That office could also have a relevance to Ethiopia. There's no reason why a CARICOM office in Addis could not be invested by the various CARICOM member states with the authority and the capacity to exercise a diplomatic and consular function in Ethiopia on behalf of CARICOM nationals in Ethiopia. And I know that this is needed because in listening to the CARICOM nationals, I mean, there are problems. I mean, there are problems being experienced, problems of lack of legal status in Ethiopia for some people, problems of landlessness for some folk, and sometimes even when they have de facto access to land, lack of secure title to the land. For some folk, there's lack of access to essential social services, education, healthcare, housing, employment. For some folk, there are passport problems, lack of passports, or lack of access to ready renewal of passports. So a CARICOM office with exercising also a diplomatic and consular function in the Democratic Republic of Ethiopia could be of great benefit to our brothers and sisters who live there. But likewise, our brothers and sisters in Ethiopia can be a resource for CARICOM because in the communique, we talk about, in terms of the AU-CARICOM relationship, we talk about trade, education, tourism, cultural and creative industries, people-to-people exchanges, air connectivity, youth exchanges, youth empowerment programs. And if we are really serious about doing these things jointly, then our nationals in Ethiopia could be, in a sense, agents of CARICOM to help to really push this agenda. And also, of course, the big one, the reparatory justice initiatives that we intend to do together, the African Union and CARICOM. You living in Ethiopia can help to push that. And this brings me now back to Sister Janelle's point about repatriation being the central plank. And I agree with Sister Janelle. And in fact, I have long argued that repatriation is really the low-hanging fruit of that CARICOM 10-point plan. And I think that we can embark upon a program of repatriation immediately. Yes, we know that ultimately those European governments and institutions that owe us reparations, and incidentally, CARICOM has identified 10 of them: the United Kingdom, Spain, Portugal, France, the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, Norway, Switzerland, and Sweden. We have identified 10 that owe reparations for African enslavement and the genocide of our native people. So we know that ultimately they are required to provide the resources to underwrite and finance a reparations program. However, we could make a start. African and Caribbean governments, we could come up with a program in which African governments and CARICOM governments can come forward and say, look, we agree, we are going to be part of this repatriation program. So these CARICOM governments, we will put a process in place to identify repatriates. The participating African countries will say, yes, we will accept these repatriates. We will provide them with certain things once you get them to Ethiopia, once you get them to Africa, to our country, legal status, access to land, guaranteed access to critical social services, and so forth. The Caribbean governments now would obviously have to say, well, we will take care of transportation, and we will take care of a certain financial package that will help them to establish themselves in the new country. And of course, everything could be transparently worked out where it is clear what the rules and regulations are, what is the process for being selected. Obviously, you would have to have a quota system because you just have to be realistic. This is the resource. This is all that the resources can manage on an annual basis. We can accommodate X number every year, et cetera, et cetera. But let us start stage one. Stage one should start with the Caribbean people who are already in places like Ethiopia. The Caribbean people who went to Ethiopia because they were inspired by the legacy of Emperor Haile Selassie, who made that Shashamane land grant in 1948 and extended an invitation to members of the African diaspora to come back home to Africa in general and to Ethiopia in particular. And those intrepid souls that through their own efforts made their way to Ethiopia, they could become stage one of the repatriation program. So how then do we construct around them this repatriation program that guarantees them legal status, access to land, access to critical social services, and financial injections from the Caribbean that can help them to really, make their life get a firm footing in the African country, and that becomes stage one, and that helps because you know in stage one you're not looking to find transportation expenses because the people are already there, so you can really maximize how you use the financial resources. But we know that that is only stage one, and the following stages will be an expanded program and will be financed by those countries and institutions that owe us reparations. And in the case of Barbados, we are already working on the establishment of an Arnold and Mignon Ford Foundation that will link Barbados, the United States, relevant entities within the United States, because Arnold and Mignon, they also did very important work in the African American communities in the United States, and of course Ethiopia. And so we are going to be crafting an initiative through an Arnold and Mignon Ford Foundation that can really help to develop that relationship. Barbados, Ethiopia, and elements of the United States. So, brothers and sisters, that is my presentation. I say that we are on the verge of great things. I love the fact that we are building these connections with each other. And I think that the future is a very bright one for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. That was truly an inspirational talk. You covered so much, and I think it really helped to ground today's conversation and also to give a lot of hope to what is possible and how far we've come. And it's amazing to hear that CARICOM is having these level and serious conversations about how they can create repatriation programs that support those on the ground. It will be music to the ears, I think, of our entire community that there is this level of intentionality in this conversation. And this is a continuation. And you said it so well, the Ford family is an example of Caribbean nationals who have been here, who've invested, who gave, who died for Ethiopia. And I think that is the spirit that all of us who are finding home, whether it's in Ethiopia or the wider African continent, really want to embody. And that really happens when we learn language, when we learn culture, when we have time for our nervous system to settle, because we're in a country that you're not constantly battling off the oppressive, the oppression. Oppression happens everywhere. Again, it's different for us when we come home. We feel the embodiment of that. So with that, I would like to thank everyone, our special guest, Ambassador, the Global Black Society and Center, this amazing space here at the Adwa Hall. This is going to be the first of many lecture series where we are going to bridge communities between the Caribbean and our family